A cold wind howled through the barren fields as Elias trudged along the muddy path, his coat pulled tight against the night's chill. The storm had arrived with sudden fury, rain lashing down in sheets and thunder rumbling low in the distance. Ahead, a faint glow flickered behind the shuttered windows of a farmhouse, a solitary beacon in the vast darkness. Elias's breath came in ragged gasps, each step heavier than the last, his boots sinking slightly into the sodden earth. He had no choice but to seek shelter there, though the weight of what he carried made every movement feel like a burden. The farmhouse stood isolated, surrounded by skeletal trees and fields left fallow, its weathered wood creaking softly in the wind. Elias paused, hesitating at the edge of the porch, heart pounding as the warm light spilling through the front window promised refuge and suspicion. The door was bolted, but faint footsteps echoed from inside, accompanied by the low murmur of voices. He raised a trembling hand and knocked, the sound muffled by the storm. Moments stretched thin before the door cracked open. A woman's sharp gaze met his, dark eyes narrowing as she took him in, clothes drenched, face drawn and pale. "Who are you?" she demanded, voice steady despite the unease flickering in her expression. Elias swallowed hard, struggling to find words that would not betray him or inflame the tension. "Please," he said quietly, voice rough and hoarse, "I need shelter from the storm." His eyes flicked to the shadows behind her, where two men stood silently, one older, with a lined face hardened by years, the other younger, tall and tense. Recognition sparked instantly in their eyes, a cold flame of memory that twisted the air between them. The older man's gaze sharpened, lips pressed tight. "You're Elias." Elias nodded slowly, the name a weight he could not escape. "Yes." The woman's grip on the doorframe tightened. "You killed my brother." Elias's eyes dropped, the ache in his chest deepening. "It was years ago. I'm not here to bring trouble." A long silence stretched, broken only by the storm's relentless assault. The family exchanged glances, their faces etched with pain and suspicion, but also the faintest trace of compassion. Finally, the woman stepped aside. "Come in," she said, voice low, wary. "But don't think this means we've forgotten." Elias stepped inside, the warmth of the farmhouse washing over him like a fragile balm. The scent of wood smoke and cooking filled the air, mingling with the underlying tension that clung to every corner. The younger man closed the door behind him, glancing toward the window as rain hammered the glass. The room was modest, sturdy furniture worn smooth by use, a fire crackling in the hearth, casting flickering shadows. Elias removed his soaked coat, revealing a lean frame marked by scars, both visible and hidden. The woman moved toward the kitchen, her movements cautious but deliberate, returning with a steaming cup of tea. "Sit," she said, setting the cup before him. "You look like you haven't eaten in days." Elias accepted the tea with trembling hands, the warmth seeping into his cold fingers. He glanced around the room, noting the portraits on the walls, family faces frozen in happier times, and the quiet watchfulness of the men. The youngest brother, no older than a boy, sat near the hearth, eyes wide and uncertain. "Why are you here now?" the older man finally asked, voice low but firm. "After all this time?" Elias met his gaze, a flicker of remorse shining through the fatigue. "I'm tired of running. I want to make things right, if I can." The woman's lips twitched, a hint of a bitter smile. "Right? You think you can undo what's been done?" "No," Elias admitted softly, "but maybe I can start by facing it." The youngest brother shifted, breaking the stillness. "Why did you do it?" Elias looked away, the question cutting deep. "It was a mistake, a moment of desperation. I never meant to kill your brother." The room held its breath, the storm outside fading into a dull roar as the fragile threads of trust began to stretch taut. The family's hospitality was hesitant, the kindness laced with guarded sorrow and suspicion. Yet, despite the shadows of the past, they had opened their door, if only for a night, to a man who carried both their pain and a flicker of hope for something beyond it. As Elias sipped his tea, the weight of the storm outside seemed to lessen, replaced by a silence thick with unspoken words and the tentative possibility of forgiveness. The fire in the hearth crackled softly, casting warm amber light across the worn wooden walls of the farmhouse. Elias sat quietly at the rough-hewn table, the mug of tea in his hands long since cooled. The room was filled with a cautious stillness, broken only by the occasional scrape of a chair or the low murmur of voices muffled by the closed door. Outside, the storm had eased to a steady drizzle, the wind's harsh whisper now a distant echo. The woman who had opened the door, Miriam, moved about the kitchen with practiced ease, setting plates of simple food before them: a loaf of crusty bread, a bowl of stew thick with root vegetables, and a small dish of salted butter. She glanced toward Elias with a mixture of wariness and reluctant kindness, her dark eyes flickering with unspoken questions. "Eat," she said quietly, her voice steady but edged with something fragile. "You've been on the road too long." Elias looked up, offering a faint nod of thanks. He reached for the bread, breaking it with slow, deliberate movements, the act grounding him in the present. The others gathered around the table, the older man, Samuel, taking his place opposite Elias, while the younger brother, Caleb, lingered near the fire, his gaze restless. The atmosphere was tight, taut with unspoken tension. Miriam's hands trembled slightly as she poured water into a pitcher, then set it down with a sigh. The family's hospitality was genuine, yet cautious, a fragile truce between past wounds and present needs. "You don't say much," Samuel observed, his voice low but carrying a weight that filled the room. "I imagine you've carried this silence for a long time." Elias swallowed, the taste of stew bitter in his mouth. "I've had little reason to speak, not where I was." Caleb's eyes narrowed, the boy's youthful anger barely contained. "You think a few words can fix what you did? You killed my uncle. You destroyed our family." Elias met Caleb's fierce gaze without flinching. "I don't pretend to fix it. I only want to be honest now, if you'll let me." The boy's expression flickered, confusion battling resentment. He looked away, folding his arms tightly across his chest. Miriam stepped closer to Elias, her voice softer, almost hesitant. "Why come here? After all these years? To what end?" Elias paused, searching for the right words. "To face what I ran from, to find some way to make amends, even if it's just by being here, in your presence." Samuel exchanged a glance with Miriam, then nodded slowly. "It's not forgiveness you seek. We don't offer that lightly. But you asked for shelter, and we gave it. That's more than many would." The room seemed to breathe with the weight of those words, the air thick with memories that no one dared to name aloud. Elias sipped his water, feeling the fatigue that had settled deep into his bones. The firelight flickered across his worn face, revealing lines carved by years of regret and hardship. Miriam drew a deep breath, her eyes distant. "Your silence hides more than just your pain. There's fear in it, fear of what we might say, fear of what you might hear." Elias nodded slowly. "I'm afraid of many things, mostly of what I don't deserve." Caleb's voice broke the stillness again, quieter now, tinged with vulnerability. "Did you ever think of us? Of what you left behind?" Elias's gaze fell to the table, fingers tracing invisible patterns in the wood grain. "Every day. I was a coward. I ran when I should have stayed, when I should have faced the consequences." Samuel leaned forward, his voice grave but not unkind. "Consequences come in many forms. Justice is not always the same as revenge." The youngest brother looked up sharply, eyes searching. "What do you want from us? Why stay if you don't expect to be forgiven?" "To be heard," Elias replied softly. "To carry the burden openly instead of alone. Maybe to find a way forward even if it's a small one." Miriam's expression softened, the hard edges of her grief momentarily giving way to empathy. "That's the hardest part, carrying it alone. But we all do, in some way." The hours passed with slow deliberation, the family sharing muted stories of loss and endurance, their voices weaving a tapestry of pain and resilience. Elias listened more than he spoke, absorbing the weight of their grief, the fractures left in his wake. Their cautious kindness was a fragile bridge, tentative and trembling, but it held. Night deepened outside, the storm's fury replaced by the steady patter of rain against the roof. The farmhouse felt like a sanctuary caught between past and present, a place where wounds could be named and perhaps, one day, soothed. Elias's eyes grew heavy, but he resisted sleep, unwilling to retreat into solitude just yet. Miriam moved to the window, watching the dark fields beyond, her silhouette framed by the dim light. Samuel busied himself with stacking firewood, his movements methodical, grounding. Caleb sat by the fire, the flickering flames reflecting in his eyes, restless yet less hostile. The air was thick with unspoken emotions, a mix of sorrow and tentative hope. Elias finally spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you. For the food, for the fire, for letting me stay." Miriam turned, offering a small, weary smile. "You're not welcome here, not yet. But you're here." The night stretched on, heavy with memories and the fragile promise of understanding. Elias sat among strangers who were bound to him by pain and history, their shared silence a quiet testament to the complexity of forgiveness and the tentative steps toward healing. The morning light filtered weakly through the grimy window panes, casting a pale glow over the modest farmhouse. Elias stirred from restless sleep, his body aching from the weight of his dreams, shadows of the past playing out in flickering scenes behind closed eyelids. The room was quiet, save for the distant clatter of pots and the murmur of voices from the kitchen. He rose slowly, every movement stiff and deliberate, and made his way toward the faint sounds downstairs. As he descended the creaking wooden stairs, the air grew heavy with unease. The family was gathered around the kitchen table, their expressions taut and wary. Miriam's eyes met his with a guarded intensity, while Samuel's jaw was set in a hard line. Caleb stood near the door, fists clenched at his sides, his youthful face pale but resolute. Before Elias could speak, the heavy knock came at the front door, sharp, insistent, and filled with authority. Miriam exchanged a glance with Samuel and moved cautiously to answer. Elias lingered near the hearth, tension knotting his stomach. The newcomer arrived, a man in a uniform bearing the insignia of the local constabulary, his face stern beneath a brimmed hat. "Morning," the officer said, voice clipped and official. "We're looking for a man named Elias. Word is he's been seen in this area." Miriam's eyes narrowed and Samuel stepped forward, placing a steadying hand on her arm. "There's been no stranger here," Samuel said firmly, though his gaze flickered toward Elias. "You're mistaken." The officer's gaze swept the room, lingering briefly on Elias, who stood quietly, shoulders squared but expression unreadable. "That's him, isn't it? Elias, we have orders to bring him in." Caleb's anger flared, his voice sharp and trembling. "You mean to drag him away? After all he's done, you want to tear him from us again?" The officer's eyes hardened. "I'm just doing my duty. He's wanted for a crime. We have no choice." Miriam stepped forward, her voice low but resolute. "He's been here, yes, but he came seeking peace. You'll not find it by tearing him from this house." The tension in the room thickened, like the heavy fog rolling over the fields outside. Elias met the officer's gaze, the weight of years pressing down on him. "I'm not running anymore," he said quietly. "If you want me, take me. But know this, I am no threat here." The officer hesitated, studying Elias with a mixture of suspicion and something almost like respect. "You don't have to make this harder than it is." Samuel stepped closer, voice steady but firm. "We won't let you take him without cause. He's among family now. That means something." The officer's hand hovered near his belt, the unspoken threat hanging in the air. Caleb's fists clenched tighter, his youthful defiance blazing. "You want to fight? You'll find it here." Miriam's eyes flashed with urgency as she moved between the officer and the family. "Enough. We're not looking for trouble, but we'll defend our own." A moment stretched taut, the unyielding silence broken only by the distant caw of a crow outside. Then the officer took a measured step back, his gaze flickering once more toward Elias. "Fine," he said curtly, "but this isn't over. We'll be back." With that, he turned and strode away, the door closing with a heavy thud behind him. The family exhaled collectively, the tension easing but not vanishing. Caleb slumped near the fire, exhaustion and relief mingling in his eyes. "They'll come again," Samuel nodded. "They always do, but we stand together." Miriam moved to pour fresh tea, her hand steady despite the turmoil. Elias watched them quietly, feeling the fragile bonds of this new connection tighten and stretch under the weight of impending danger. The morning wore on, conversations hushed and cautious. The family exchanged wary glances, their unease palpable. Elias remained mostly silent, the officer's visit stirring a storm of emotions he struggled to contain: fear, guilt, determination. Later, as the rain began anew, Miriam broke the silence. "You have to tell us everything. We need to know the truth." Elias met her gaze, the walls he had built around himself trembling. "There's no simple truth, only pieces scattered and broken." Caleb looked up sharply, eyes searching. "Start somewhere." Taking a deep breath, Elias began to speak, his voice low and steady. He recounted the night it happened, the desperation that clouded his judgment, the fear that gripped him, the unintended consequences. His words hung heavy in the air, each sentence a fragile thread weaving a tapestry of regret. The family listened, their faces a mixture of sorrow and anger, but also understanding. Miriam's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Samuel's jaw clenched tightly, and Caleb's youthful fury softened into troubled reflection. When Elias finished, a profound silence settled over them. The storm outside mirrored the turmoil within, rain tapping steadily against the window panes. Slowly, Miriam reached out, placing a tentative hand on Elias's arm. "Thank you for telling us," she said softly. "It's not forgiveness, but it's a start." Samuel nodded in agreement. "We carry our own burdens, but sharing them lightens the load." Caleb looked at Elias, his voice quieter now. "Maybe there's more to you than the man we thought we knew." Elias felt a flicker of something unfamiliar, hope perhaps, amid the shadows of his past. The family's guarded acceptance was fragile, yet real. As night fell again, the farmhouse settled into uneasy peace. Outside, the storm raged anew, but inside, the walls held a tentative warmth, a fragile sanctuary where old wounds might begin to heal and where the threads of trust could slowly be woven through shared pain and guarded hearts. The flickering firelight painted shifting shadows across the walls as evening deepened, the farmhouse wrapped in a heavy silence that felt both fragile and necessary. Elias sat close to the hearth, his fingers tracing the rough grain of the wooden armrest, eyes distant but steady. The weight of the morning's confession settled over the room like a dense fog, yet beneath it stirred a tentative flicker of connection. Miriam broke the stillness, voice soft but deliberate. "You've carried this burden alone for so long. It must have been unbearable." Elias nodded slowly, the lines etched in his face deepening. I thought silence would keep the pain contained, but it just made it worse, like a wound that never heals. Samuel leaned forward, hands clasped tightly, the firelight revealing the scars on his weathered knuckles. We all have our stories, our losses. Sometimes it's the telling that begins to mend the fractures. Caleb, who had been quiet for some time, finally spoke, his youthful voice tentative. Tell us about your brother. What happened that night? Elias's breath caught, memories crashing in waves. He wasn't really my brother, just a friend. But that night, everything spiraled out of control. I didn't mean for it to end the way it did. He swallowed hard, pain flickering in his eyes. It started as a fight over nothing, anger flaring between men who'd lost their way. I was reckless, desperate to prove myself. Before I knew it, I'd struck him down. Miriam's gaze held his, unwavering. And the years after? I ran, Elias admitted. Every step away from here was a step away from who I was. I tried to bury it, but the past always catches up. Samuel's voice was steady, carrying the weight of years and hard-earned wisdom. You made a mistake, yes, but you survived it. We all do what we must to live. Caleb shifted, the anger in his eyes tempered by curiosity. Why come back now? After all this time? To face it, Elias replied simply. To stop running from the ghost, to see if there's a way to live with the man I became. The room was still, the air thick with emotion. Miriam reached out, her fingers brushing lightly against Elias's hand. A small gesture, but one heavy with meaning. We're not the same people we were, she said softly. None of us. But we can choose how to move forward. Elias looked up, meeting each face in turn. The cautious hope in Miriam's eyes, the guarded strength in Samuel's, the tentative acceptance in Caleb's. For the first time in years, he felt the stirrings of something he thought lost, belonging. He cleared his throat, voice steady but tinged with vulnerability. I want to be honest with you. About everything. No more secrets. Miriam nodded, a quiet smile touching her lips. We're ready to listen. Over the next hours, Elias shared fragments of his life. The struggles, the regrets, the moments of fleeting hope. He spoke of the loneliness that had become his constant companion, the nights haunted by memories of that fateful day. The family listened, their silence a testament to the bridge being built between past and present. Samuel finally spoke, voice firm but compassionate. It takes courage to face the truth. You've taken the first step. Caleb looked at Elias with newfound respect. Maybe you're not just the man we thought you were. Elias allowed himself a small, weary smile. I'm trying to be better. Miriam rose and moved to the window, looking out into the night. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges, but tonight we found a measure of peace. The fire crackled softly, its warmth a balm against the chill outside. Within the walls of the farmhouse, a fragile connection had been forged, one born of shared pain, honesty, and the tentative hope for healing. Elias sat back, exhaustion heavy in his limbs, but lightness stirring in his heart. For the first time, the silence that once suffocated him held the promise of understanding, and perhaps, one day, forgiveness. The tension in the farmhouse was palpable, a fragile thread stretched taut between hope and uncertainty. The rain had ceased, leaving the night air damp and thick with the scent of earth and wood smoke. Outside, the world seemed still, but inside, the storm was far from over. A sharp, hurried knock shattered the uneasy calm. Miriam exchanged a glance with Samuel, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. Elias, seated by the fire, stiffened, the weight of past fears pressing down anew. Samuel moved to the door, hesitating only a moment before opening it. A man in a dark uniform stood on the porch, his expression cold and unyielding. Behind him, two more figures emerged from the shadows, officers bearing the unmistakable authority of the law. "We've come for Elias," the man announced, his voice clipped and uncompromising. "He's wanted for the killing of your brother. We have a warrant for his arrest." Miriam stepped forward, her voice steady but resolute. "He's here under our roof. You'll not take him without cause." Samuel's broad shoulders squared, a protective instinct igniting within him. "This is our home. You'll have to go through us first." The lead officer's gaze flicked toward Elias, who rose slowly, the years of running and hiding etched into every line of his face. "I'm ready to face whatever comes, but I ask you, do you truly believe justice is served by tearing a man away from those who have shown him kindness?" Caleb, standing near the hearth, clenched his fist, eyes blazing with youthful defiance. "We won't let you drag him away, not without a fight." The officers exchanged glances, the air thick with tension. The lead man's hand rested near his belt, fingers twitching in readiness. "We're only doing our duty." Miriam positioned herself firmly between the officers and Elias, voice low but fierce. "Then do your duty elsewhere. This family stands united." Samuel stepped beside her, voice resolute. "If you want to take him, you'll have to go through us." The standoff stretched, the silence heavy with unspoken threats and the weight of history. Elias met the officer's gaze, his own steady despite the turmoil inside. Finally, the lead officer took a measured step back. "We'll return with a stronger force. This isn't over." With that, the officers retreated into the night, their footsteps fading into the distance. Caleb sank onto a chair, exhaustion and relief mingling in his expression. "They'll be back," Samuel nodded grimly, "and when they do, we'll be ready." Miriam closed the door, turning to Elias with a mixture of sympathy and determination. "You belong here now. We'll protect you." The family gathered near the fire, voices low as they debated their next steps. The weight of impending confrontation hung heavy, but so did the fierce loyalty that had begun to root itself in this fragile new kinship. Elias, for the first time in years, felt the stirrings of hope, not just for himself, but for the family that had chosen to stand by him despite the past. As the night deepened, plans were whispered and resolve solidified. Outside, the world remained dark and uncertain, but within the walls of the farmhouse, a new kind of strength was born, a strength forged in shared pain, fierce protection, and the unyielding bond of chosen family. The farmhouse hummed quietly in the early dawn, the first pale light filtering through the curtains and casting soft shadows across the worn wooden floors. Inside, a new rhythm had settled, a fragile harmony born from hardship and the shared decision to protect what had been forged amidst pain. Elias sat near the hearth, the fire's warmth a steady comfort against the chill that lingered beyond the walls. Miriam moved about the kitchen with a quiet grace, preparing a simple breakfast. Her eyes met Elias's briefly, a silent acknowledgement that spoke volumes. Here, in this place, he was no longer a stranger, no longer a man running from his past, but a part of something greater. Samuel leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching the interplay with a measured calm. Caleb, younger, yet steadier than before, busied himself stacking firewood, the chores grounding them all in the present. The days that followed were marked by a cautious peace. The threat of the officer's return loomed, but it was tempered by the family's unwavering resolve. They had chosen to stand together, a new form of kinship born not of blood, but of shared wounds and mutual protection. Elias felt the weight of his past beginning to lift, replaced by a tentative sense of belonging. The quiet moments, Miriam's soft smiles, Samuel's steady presence, Caleb's youthful energy, wove a tapestry of hope that slowly mended the fractures within him. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low, casting golden light through the windows, Elias found himself sitting beside Miriam on the porch. The air was warm, scented with earth and the faint trace of smoke. He reached out, hesitating, then took her hand gently. "I never thought I'd find this," he murmured, voice thick with emotion. "A place to call home." Miriam squeezed his hand, her eyes shining. "We all need that. A place where we're seen, accepted." Samuel joined them, nodding in agreement. Family isn't just who you're born to. It's who stands by you when the world turns its back. Caleb appeared then, carrying a small bundle wrapped in cloth. He smiled shyly and handed it to Elias. "We found this in the attic," he said. "Belonged to your friend." Elias unwrapped the bundle carefully, revealing a worn leather journal, its pages yellowed but intact. His fingers trembled as he opened it, the familiar scrawl of handwriting bringing a rush of memories. "Thank you," Elias whispered, eyes glistening. "This means more than you know." That night, as firelight danced across the walls, Elias shared stories from the journal, moments of hope, fear, and friendship long past. The family listened, their faces illuminated by the flickering glow, hearts opening to the man who had once been an outsider. Months passed, and with them came healing. The farmhouse transformed from a refuge into a home filled with laughter, shared meals, and the quiet comfort of belonging. Elias and Miriam's bond deepened, their love a testament to resilience and forgiveness. Caleb grew stronger, his youthful anger replaced by a steady confidence nurtured by the family's care. Samuel's presence remained a steady anchor, guiding them through the remnants of uncertainty. One crisp morning, Elias stood by the riverbank, the journal tucked under his arm. Miriam joined him, her hand slipping into his. Together, they watched the water flow, steady, relentless, and full of promise. "I want to build a life here," Elias said softly. "With you, with all of us." Miriam smiled, her eyes reflecting the peaceful river's calm. A new beginning. The story lingered in the quiet moments, the shared glances, the unspoken promises. They had forged a sanctuary amid the shadows of the past, a place where love and forgiveness thrived against all odds. Their home stood as a beacon of hope, a testament to the power of connection and the strength found in choosing family. In the face of loss and pain, they had created something enduring, a sanctuary where wounds could heal and where the future held the promise of peace. If you love the story, like the video and subscribe.